Hello, today we're going to talk about diversity, and the particular diversity chapter that we're going to talk about today can be found in the back of your book. So it's not the chapter two that you're going to come across after chapter one, after the self awareness chapter, but you'll actually have to flip to the back to get the content for diversity in organizations. So I'm going to hopefully, to keep this lecture brief. I'm just going to introduce the different forms of workplace diversity, highlight some common areas where discrimination occurs in the workplace, and then wrap up with different ways we can manage diversity effectively in the organization. And then I'm going to explain kind of your next steps of some videos that I want you to watch to kind of look at diversity in different ways, right, is the idea behind those videos. All right, so when we talk about workplace diversity, this particular chapter looks at diversity and says, diversity management is necessary. We want diversity in the workplace. And there's two different types of diversity, surface level and deep level diversity. Right, and so if we look at this idea of surface level diversity, this is the diversity that we can see. So we can look at someone, and it's those characteristics that we can see, and that is we can identify some diverse factors that way. Diversity also is a lot deeper than that. So when we think about deep level diversity, we're looking at people's values, personality, things that we want to know about a person by just looking at them or by looking, in their personnel file. Right. And so we want to recognize that there's more to someone than just that surface level, right? Diversity is much more than just those factors. Diversity is also, personality, values, background, experiences, where you grew up, where you live. All these factors impact kind of how diverse we are, right? And we want to recognize that as kind of this big picture of what diversity is. One of the challenges with diversity is this idea of discrimination. The definition itself of discrimination is to note a difference between things. So we do have to discriminate in order to make decisions, to make hiring decisions, to decide who's going to get promoted, who's going to get transferred, whatever, who's going to get fired. Right, so we have to note these differences in order to make a decision, right? If I have 10 people applying for a job, I have to discriminate on something to figure out who the one person is that's going to get it. All right, we want to make sure that we're discriminating based on job-related factors. All right, and we don't want this unfair discrimination that assumes stereotypes about groups, and we make decisions based on these protected factors, because honestly, as we go through these different factors, there's research that suggests for most of them that there's nothing that shows that there's a difference between those of a certain race, that people of a certain race are more productive or smarter. That research is really hard to come by, right? There's not a lot of evidence that suggests that. So why are we discriminating on that? Why are we using that as a basis for our decision making? Not only is it illegal, but it doesn't make sense. If we're trying to be the most productive, the most efficient organization, discriminating based on those factors, it doesn't match. All right, so we want to make sure that we recognize what are these factors that are oftentimes used unfairly, so we can work to overcome that. So we can recognize that, first of all, it's illegal to discriminate based on these factors, and it doesn't make sense to, right? That research isn't there to support doing so. This chart just shows some different forms of discrimination. So we can see on the very left-hand side of this is the type of discrimination, whether it's in our policies, harassment, intimidation, and then you can kind of see the definition and some examples of that. sometimes this is intentional discrimination, sometimes it's unintentional discrimination, and regardless, it creates this, environment that's stressful, that is unfair, that increases turnover, that increases absenteeism. And these are all factors that organizations are very concerned about and recognize as important. And so we want to make sure that we're creating an environment that supports diversity, and that we're providing training for our managers, that we're providing training for our employees, so we can minimize this discrimination from happening. So when we look at surface level versus deep level, biological characteristics are that surface level diversity, right? These are characteristics that are easily obtained from personnel records, are typically seen, like I can look at someone and, make a judgment on their race or make a judgment on their age, right? I can kind of see these things. And so that kind of makes up this surface level diversity. And a lot of these factors can be the basis for discrimination. So we want to kind of recognize that. So one of the biological characteristics is age. And so the idea, there's two thoughts here. As you get older, you get wiser, you gain more knowledge, and that's very valuable to the organization. The misperception, though, is that as you get older, you're not as productive, you're resistant to change, and some of those kind of more negative attributes. Regardless of kind of how we feel about age, it is a protected class. If you're 40 or older, we cannot discriminate based on that age. And really, studies show that turnover and absenteeism rates are lower among older workers, and age is not associated with lower productivity. All right. So again, the research does not support the perception that, older employees are not as productive, not as knowledgeable. So we want to recognize that. All right. So the U.S. workforce is aging, so we do need to adjust, because as we think about different incentives and different motivators for an aging workforce, we want to kind of think about that. How are we going to motivate our employees as kind of our workforce in general is aging, and how do we ensure that we're not discriminating based on that factor? Sex is another biological factor, the surface level diversity. And again, as you see on the screen, there's no consistent male-female differences in problem-solving ability, analytical skills, competitive drive, motivation, sociability, or learning drive. So there's no reason that we're discriminating based on this factor, right? There's no advantage to hire one over the other based on kind of these things that we would expect from employees in our organization. However, we still see women earning less than men for the same positions and have fewer professional opportunities than men. So this type of discrimination is still happening in organizations. Race and ethnicity is another surface level diversity factor. Some important things kind of to note here, that employees tend to favor colleagues of their own race in performance evaluations, promotion decisions, and pay raises. So meaning, as a manager, I tend to give preference to those employees who are similar to me, who look like me, who act like me, right? And so I'm promoting those people who are like me. And so if we're not very diverse at that management level, again, we're not going to be increasing our diversity throughout the organization, right? And we're discriminating against people because of these protected classes. African Americans and Hispanics perceive higher levels of discrimination in the workplace. So whether it's intentional or unintentional, it's perceived that they're being discriminated against, that they're being treated differently than their colleagues. And again, this creates a very maybe hostile environment, one that I'm not very motivated in. And so as an organization, if I'm really wanting to be diverse, it's going to be hard to retain diversity if if people feel like they're being discriminated against, that they're not being supported in this organization. People with disabilities are also protected under the law, but this also becomes an area where discrimination does occur. So when we look at those with disabilities, the law says that we do need to provide accommodations for those individuals. We need to accommodate them as long as it doesn't impose kind of an undue hardship on the organization, meaning, as long as the organization can't afford it, they need to accommodate those individuals with that have a disability. Workers with disabilities receive higher performance evaluations, but may have lower performance expectations. So those people with disabilities are just as smart, just as capable, if they have that accommodation, but sometimes we assume differently. Right? And so we want to make sure that we're evaluating their skill, their knowledge, not evaluating the fact that they have a disability. The laws around disability have expanded in terms of what actually constitutes a disability. And so disability, kind of the definition now includes, these sensory disabilities, chronic illness or pain, cognitive and learning impairments, and the definition is definitely a lot broader. And so these are what are known as kind of these hidden disabilities, because we can't see these things. All right, so it really becomes, the employee really needs to be willing to share this disability in order for the organization to accommodate them. All right, so organizations must accommodate employees with these, with the particular disability that they have, but it's not the organization's responsibility to just automatically know someone has this disability. All right, so it is a conversation that needs to happen. And again, it's something that we accommodate, not judge or make decisions based on. Tenure is seen as a positive thing. It is something that I can legally discriminate on, right? So tenure is the length of time someone has been in a job. So tenure is a good predictor of employee productivity. Tenure and job satisfaction are positively related. And again, as long as I'm using this factor consistently, I can discriminate based on how long you've been in a job. So the most tenure people, might avoid a layoff, where if I'm going through a layoff and I have to make the decision of who's laid off and who's not, I can use tenure as a factor in that decision making. Religion, on the other hand, is something that I cannot discriminate against, and this is something that I need to accommodate, similar to a disability. So different religious preferences or practices is something that an organization needs to accommodate and talk to the employee and see how they can help support those religious practices. Again, illegal to discriminate on this factor in most cases. The last two, sexual orientation and gender identity and cultural identity. With sexual orientation and gender identity, the federal law currently hasn't caught up, and there's no protection for employees based on discrimination in terms of sexual orientation. But there's, 90% of Fortune 500 companies have policies covering sexual orientation, and about half now have policies on gender identity. So organizations are recognizing and being proactive in creating policies and practices, again, to create this environment that supports sexual orientation and supports gender identity, and tries to prevent discrimination from happening in their workplace around these factors. All right, so again, just because the law hasn't caught up doesn't mean it's acceptable, right? We still want to do the right thing. We want to hire people based on their knowledge, their skills, their abilities, not on these biological factors, right? And we want to really encourage diversity. We want to encourage a lot of different factors in our organization because that does make us a stronger organization overall. So how do we manage this? So how do we encourage this diversity? What can we do to create this environment? First off, the definition behind diversity management is the process and programs by which managers make everyone more aware of and sensitive to the needs and differences of others, right? In order to get the best out of everyone, right? And to make sure that we are basing decisions on the right factors. It's important to note that diversity is more successful when it is everyone's business and not just for certain groups of employees to worry about, right? We want everyone to be concerned about diversity and encourage diversity and recognize the benefits of diversity. There's 3 areas that this particular chapter focuses on in order to help manage diversity in the workplace. One is kind of the attracting and kind of hiring process. The second one is putting effective diversity programs into place. And the third one is having diversity in groups. The first one, attracting, selecting, developing, and retaining diverse employees. This is one area where HR and managers can look to try to increase diversity. So I can change where I'm recruiting. I can go to more diverse sources to get different types of people to even be aware that there is an opening, so they are can apply to these positions. Making sure that I'm training my employees, my managers in this process to make sure they're hiring based on, again, the job related factors and it's bias free. And which will help create a positive diversity climate, right? So when we think about our recruiters who are going out there to colleges, to different career fairs, we want to make sure that those recruiters are well trained to represent the organization and to make sure that they're encouraging all types of people to, inquire about our organization, to apply for our organization, and they're not saying inappropriate things or implying things or discriminating at those events, all right? Because that's the first time that someone is maybe getting someone to talk to about this position or about this organization. So they do represent the organization in those circumstances. Diversity in groups, so within the organization, getting people, rotating people from one group to another group so they can learn about others, making sure that, we're doing some icebreaker type of activities so employees can get to know one another beyond just what they do here at work, right? So the more I know about someone now, even though if we might be really different, right? We might look different. We might be from different cultures or different countries, and so that if I can't get past that, then we're not truly going to see the benefits of diversity. So how do I get these two different people, right, to want to connect and have a relationship? And so that's what those icebreakers and different, get to know you type of activities are all about. It has nothing to do with the job itself, but it does help employees recognize maybe we do have some similarities, right? Yeah, we're from these different backgrounds and different countries, but we both really enjoy baseball, or we both really enjoy running, whatever it might be. And we start finding these maybe small connections that lead to larger connections that lead to us being more willing to listen to that individual now that we kind of recognize some of these similarities that we that we have. And so encouraging those types of events and encouraging rotation of employees, again, to get to know one another beyond just kind of what they do at that organization or beyond just what we can see. The last area to help us manage diversity is making sure that you have effective diversity programs. So making sure that you're encouraging employees to treat others fairly, making sure that we're teaching managers the benefits of a diverse workforce, making sure that we're providing training on what it means to focus on job-related factors and versus discriminatory factors, all right, and making sure that we're not just doing it or saying it, but we're also doing it, all right, and so making sure that the top of the organization is doing these things, right? They're walking the talk. Then it's easier for everyone else to hold on to that and repeat that. All right, if upper management is saying one thing but doing something different, we focus on those actions more than the words. So we want to make sure that top management is also practicing this diversity management and providing fair treatment to all employees. All right, so there's a lot of different implications for managers when we start talking about diversity. We want to understand your organization's anti-discrimination policies and share them with your employees. All right. So again, it's this encouragement, it's this communication that we value diversity and that we do not tolerate discrimination. Assess and challenge your own stereotype beliefs to increase your objectivity. So making sure you kind of look at yourself and assess, your thoughts and your feelings, right? And try to increase your awareness of groups that are maybe different from you. Encourage others and encourage yourself to look beyond kind of those observable biological or biographical characteristics and consider the individual's capabilities before making management decisions. All right, so going beyond just what we can see, but really assessing their knowledge, their skills, their abilities in those employment-related decisions. Fully evaluate what accommodations a person with disabilities will need, and then fine-tune a job to that person's abilities. Right? This has to do with a lot of communication. Communicate with that employee, go back and forth, and figure out what's going to work. Okay, what makes sense. Seek to understand and respect the unique biographical characteristics of your employees. All right, making sure that you're being fair in your approach, right, in order to get the best performance out of employees. The last thing that I want you to think about is these videos that I'm going to ask you to view. So after this lecture, you'll see a list of, 5 or 6 videos, and some of them, are less than a minute long. Others maybe up to 7 minutes at the most. So it's not they're short videos, but the person who does the video, her name is Dr. Kira Hudson Banks, and if I'm correct, she graduated from Edwardsville High School, went on and got her PhD, and now teaches as an associate professor at St. Louis University. And she focuses on diversity and race, and just has some really powerful videos for us just to think about. And that's the idea of what I want you to get out of this diversity chapter. Not only recognizing what are some of those common factors that we discriminate against, that are illegal to discriminate against, but also just to maybe think differently, put you into the shoes of someone who's been discriminated against, and all in an effort to not make you feel bad, but to maybe in the next instance that you're faced with, maybe we think a little differently in it. So the Truth to Power videos are just that, right? To give you some more information, maybe a different perspective, a different voice, and she does an excellent job at explaining some of these concepts and giving you some really good examples just to consider. So I hope you enjoy them, but I do expect that you watch them. They're brief, and I don't think it's too much to ask to add that to kind of the list of things to do for this chapter. So I hope you enjoy them. If you have any questions, let me know.